Let me say hello to everybody. I'm Dorothy Grinder. I was born and grew up in Stanton, Tennessee, here in West Tennessee. And I have been involved in working against this monster. And you'll notice here, that my presentation is entitled Systemic Racism, the Underbelly of American Democracy. And I'm going to actually talk about history that probably all of you know, but we need to understand how this thing in terms of systemic racism, it feeds individual racism that people exhibit toward other people, but even people who think they're being kind, it influences their behavior, and they do certain things that it results in where we are today. In terms of, now who is operating, give me the next slide. Who's operating the slide? Go slide by slide, yeah.
Do you have a clicker?
No, I don't have a clicker.
She has one.
There you go.
All right, systemic racism. So I got, yeah, and then we just call for the next slide. And since we only have 20 minutes, I'm going to try to get through this, but
take your time.
yeah. All right, these are policies and practices that exist throughout the society that result in and support a continued advantage to some people and unfair disadvantage to others based on race or ethnicity. It may manifest as discrimination in arenas such as education, employment, housing, healthcare, criminal justice, and political representation. It originates in the operation of established and respected social forces. And this is not, as I said, in terms of, you can have people who are good people. It undergirds behaviors, what people think to be so. And less than that, can we have the next one? And so this is a model here, and you'll note this thing in terms of that actually, some of the things that what feeds racial equity and what feeds racism and so on. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this, that what people believe in my group that I was in this morning, I offered one of the things that happened maybe 50, 60 years ago for me when I first started teaching. And I was down in Florida A&M, working with a student who was working with community groups. And there was this thing about people in the audience who believed, we were talking about inequities then, that was 60 years ago. We were talking about, again, inequity. And what the point was, is that group of people, meaning they were African American, didn't pay taxes. And, you know, helping people understand, there were people in this group who were making decisions relative to what should happen to African Americans based on their belief that they didn't pay taxes. I lived in Brownsville about 10 years ago, and the same thing is out there in terms of, again, what people think. Good people should be coming forth to people based on what they contribute to the society, and it's misunderstanding about what is being contributed. So, you know, for example, the same thing when I went to graduate school back in the 1860s, the 1960s, that the white graduate students, they weren't being, they were good people, but who assumed that how I got there was I got there because somebody bent the rules and let me in. And I was smarter than all of them. Look, I don't mind telling you that. That happened to many black students, you know, that they did not get certain things because the assumption was that they were there only because they were black, not because of their abilities. Now I have to tell you one of my many stories, and this is this kind of thing. When I was on the faculty at Tennessee State, I taught a class, it was something about, I think it was called Black Psychology or something like that. And it met once a week, maybe on a Wednesday at 7 o'clock at night or something like that. But anyway, there was this one student in this class, and that student, in terms of when we had discussions and so on, she was head and above everybody else. She was bright. So I asked her to stay after class one night, and I asked her why she wasn't in a program over in biology. She was a biology student that I helped with, and she said she didn't know about it. And I asked her what year was she? She was a senior. I said, how could you be a senior and not know about this program? Well, anyway, it turned out she had transferred to Tennessee State in her senior year, okay? And she had transferred from the University of California at Berkeley. And I said, why would you be transferring from Berkeley in your senior year to Tennessee State? Now, I did not mean anything, as some people might be thinking, drawing the conclusion that Tennessee State is inferior. No, but, you've done almost 4 years at the school. Well, she said she transferred because she had a friend who had come to Meharry, and the friend told her about the air of acceptance and so on. And the experience that she had had in the 3 years she'd been there at Berkeley was a suspicion that she was at Berkeley because somebody had bent the rule and let her in. This was a bright child, and she said it didn't bother her so much when she encountered a student who thought that she had taken a seat that somebody more deserving should have. But it really bothered her when she encountered professors who also assumed the same thing. That's systemic racism. These are good people, okay? These are good people, okay? The professor may hold a Pulitzer Prize. They are good people, okay? But it colors what they think, okay? And hence what they do. All right, now let me have the next one. That in terms of this notion about systemic racism, there isn't anything new about it. Back when I was young, it was what was called institutional racism. And this is a definition from Nestor Carmichael in the book that he wrote with, and I'm pulling a mental block now, with Hamilton, I think that was his name. But that says that I think this white terrorist bomb a black church and kill 5 black children. That is an act of individual racism. But when in the same city, Birmingham, Alabama, 500 black babies die each year because of the lack of proper food, shelter, and medical facilities, and thousands more are destroyed and maimed physically, emotionally, and intellectually because of conditions of poverty and discrimination in the black community, that is a function of institutional racism. And the discrimination is not in the terms of doing something necessarily against individual people, but making the assumption this community does not pay any taxes, and hence they don't deserve X, Y, and Z. Okay? And this has been operating in the United States of America all of the time. We see it in terms of the person from the Republican Party who is seeking the presidency of the United States. And it isn't about, it's the threat of it, meaning in terms of telling people, why don't you go back home? African Americans have experienced that. Why don't you go back to Africa? There are people, again, good people, who don't know that African Americans have been here longer than most white people have been in the United States. Now, let me say that again, in case you didn't know that. That in terms of, you look at the early history of the United States and who is coming into the United States, it is not white European. It is enslaved Africans who are being imported into the United States in higher rate back there in the 1700s and so on like that. The masses of people, in terms of, after many people, are here in the 19th, coming in the early 19th century. Now, it's these kinds of things that undergirds the notion of systemic racism. Now, I think we need to do, let me go, a brief history, let me have the next one. A brief history of the United States of America. And keep this in mind, this is not something I think that you don't know. That the United States was modeled after European efforts to meet Yemen, and this is its ordinary people, demands for greater participation in government. You remember that there are all these big barons, you know, kings and stuff like that, who control the land and stuff like that. And when there is the demand for some representation, this is the time on the Magna Carta and those kinds of things. The population of the American colonies was more diverse than that of established European countries. In fact, one way it was different was that big African presence that was here. The founding fathers and the enslaver, Thomas Jefferson, envisioned the United States as a government made up of free holding farmers with certain inalienable rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, are the right to own property, okay? That's essentially the underbase of the, let me have the next one, the undergirding of this. But the fatal flaw in this vision, as all of you know if you've read any of Jefferson's writings and stuff like that, was that all men meant all white men, Europeans. Non-white men and non-men, non-white men and non-men. Women, maybe I'm not going to talk about that. Were not granted these rights. Furthermore, white men were granted the right to claim property rights in the bodies of non-white people. That African Americans were property. And it wasn't just deeper, but you know, that your progeny, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, all of them were destined to be slaves. Now, when you read some of the stuff that people are putting out there in the popular literature, you know, yes, slavery existed in all societies and so on. But what we need to understand is how it became different here in the United States of America. It is different than what it was even in Brazil and Cuba and stuff like that. And Cuba is very much tied to the United States, that kind of thing. Customs and laws developed consistent with this social organization. In fact, the equality of white men was dependent on the subjugation of non-white people who are, you know, primarily African. And this is why I call it the underbelly. That this notion of systemic racism is sort of like, you know, we can do an analogy. You know, your underclothes. Your clothes that you wear on the outside look a certain way, but they are underpinned by what you wear underneath. And you don't show, you know, for the most part, what is underneath, you know, your girdles and so on like that. Well, that's what systemic racism, but it shapes, you know, what is there on the outside. Now, we fast to the next one. We fast forward 85 years to 1861, and we see rich white men who claim property rights in other human beings taking steps to break up the Union because chattel slavery is not allowed to expand as this expansion spreads the ability of small white farmers to compete and survive. We tend to forget that. It isn't about, now there were abolitionists fighting to stop slavery, but the big issue, what it was that the slave owners wanted slavery to be allowed in the expanded territory. The United States is expanding. It opened Kansas up and so on. Individual white farmers who had migrated from Europe couldn't compete with slave owners. You can't compete with a man, and they men primarily, but women on with slave owners too. So I do not mean to imply that. Who have 500 hands put his 500 hands up, and by hands I mean persons, to clear the land and to raise crops. One individual person and their family cannot in no way compete with them. And so one of the things that often is not emphasized in terms of the history of the United States is that issue, and why there is this attempt to, curtail it. But it's the point that these are rich men. These are rich men. I think people don't really understand that if you could own 50 slaves, you were a rich person. That if you translate that into today's dollars and understand the richness of it. Now, we live in a culture that celebrates rich people. We celebrate, what is that man's name that's connected with the Bill Gates, and some people are, I keep coming back to it. Some people are attracted to former President Trump in terms of his richness, that kind of thing. And it's systemic racism. There's systemic racism, meaning what are these policies and so on that undergird all of this stuff, and it's operating in 2024, just as it did in 1861. It's just in a different form. The American Civil War is fought over this issue, and the aftermath of the bloody conflict is the freeing of 4 million enslaved persons with no means to support themselves. The freeing of 4 million people who've been held enslaved with no means to support themselves. Why did that happen? One, because neither the South nor the North expected, when the Civil War started, neither side expected that the war would result in the freeing, the emancipation of that body of slaves. I want to say that again, because again, I don't think we fully appreciate what that means. Neither side expected that it would result in the emancipation of that body of 4 million people. And why did it result in that? Primarily because when those enslaved people saw the opportunity, they grabbed the opportunity. Frederick Douglass was successful in encouraging Lincoln to accept them into the Union Army. The Union Army would not have triumphed against the Confederate Army had there not been the 200,000 black men who fought at USCT. And I think, we know that, but we think those 200 black men, because we saw that movie about the Massachusetts, I forget what, we think that's where they came from. But they came from places like Tennessee. Actually, Tennessee contributed 20,000. 200, we've been able in Haywood County to identify from Haywood County. 200. Do you hear what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. These are, we're not talking about those fictionalized people that they did when they made Glory. I finally know the name. But we're talking about folks that, if you grew up like I did in Stanton, Tennessee, that while you didn't know personally in terms of when I came along, they had all died. But most of the families that these people came from, their descendants didn't know that they were United States colored troops. In Fayette County, a unit, I think it was the 55th, or maybe it was, I think that was what it was, the 55th Infantry, was created and was housed there in Fayette County. And so, that kind of history, again, is there, okay? Now, Abraham Lincoln, with this notion of a government for the people, by the people, and, that kind of thing, and then he died, stuff like that. So we have discussion that, what was Lincoln's, but it's not so much important what was Lincoln's attitude, is that when Lincoln goes, Now, I think Lincoln was a pragmatist in the sense of that I really read it to me when he says, I'll do whatever to save the Union, okay, kind of thing. But what happens, again, with the freeing of those people is that they were not given any means to support themselves. And, you know, people might ask, why should that be? Everybody who's come to the United States was given means of supporting themselves. All of the people who say nobody paid taxes when they came from Europe, like England and so on, they were given land grants. Most of the people in Haywood County, and I'm talking about the white people in Haywood County, when Haywood County was created in 1824 and they moved in from North Carolina, Virginia, and South Carolina, they were given land grants. Okay? Again, they didn't pull themselves up by the bootstrap. Many of the whites who came into the United States after the Civil War at the late 1800s, the ones who came through Ellis Island in the 1860s, that's why the United States created the land grant program that ended up creating places like the University of Michigan and all of that. They were given land grants too. And those universities, Minnesota, Michigan, Indiana, and so on, and here in Tennessee, it's the University of Tennessee, were created to help them in terms of farming the land and so on like that. At that same time, nothing was created for African Americans. Okay? Did you hear? Nothing. You may have read in terms of the, you know, it's the missionary societies like that created and undergird the Fisk University, the Roger Williams and stuff like that. It is not anything in terms of policy on the government's part. And even I have to, at this period, you remember that General Sherman during the war had an issue that I don't remember what the order number is right off the top of my head, but in the Sea Islands in Georgia, the 40 acres and a mule. And for the freed people, there was a belief, and in this document, I'm not a historian, like I told you, I'm a social psychologist, but you can find evidence of stuff that freed slaves expected the 40 acres and a mule. As a matter of fact, a meeting was held at the courthouse in Brownsville, Tennessee, and a near riot broke out, but it wasn't because of the freed people, it was because of the whites who had pretty much decided at that time there wasn't going to be, any redistribution and so on like that. Okay, so, now, one other point about at the time of the Civil War, the country, in terms of, it's about the time of when emancipation occurred, but there are things like the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision. Those things are done away with. You know, there isn't any, we're wrong. They're still accepted as being right. And what begins to appear is few people who were in the Confederacy. They're not in the Confederacy. They're not prosecuted for being Confederate. By 1870, essentially, in most places in the South, they have resumed control over it. And obviously they can do that because the black population is what? It's primarily uneducated. Okay, that doesn't mean, when you look at the record, it doesn't mean that they don't recognize where they are. But in terms of how things are done and stuff like that, and I'm going to get back to that same thing again, that population didn't have the background to do certain kinds of things, the connection to do certain kinds of things, and nothing was done to make it possible. So, for example, all across the South, there were plantation owners who had hoarded their cotton. Now, again, when you read those things, it's the Confederate government is telling them to burn cotton so the cotton doesn't fall into the hand of the Union Army. They didn't, for those who did not burn their cotton, when the war is over and they take their cotton out of storage or wherever they were hiding it and selling it, they make huge dollars off that cotton. But there's no longer says they gotta share those profits with the people who had made the cotton. And they, at that time, they knew all the people who made the cotton because they had just been duty free. There was nothing to distribute, you know, that kind of thing. So, in terms of when you look at the country, there is an attempt to redefine from the parts of some people, but the definition and the what is the relationship of African American people to whites remain the same, and it actually even become worse. Okay, so in terms of now, don't be if you never studied this stuff. Don't think that blacks did not try to counter it, okay? There were wars all over the South. Literally wars, L-I-T-E-R-A-L-L-Y. People understood how to protect themselves and so on. And they attempted to counter it, but they didn't have the power. Meaning, they didn't have the resources, okay? Not only, you know, that kind of thing. And so it's lost. In many places like Haywood County, they can successfully chase them away from the polls. So in 1888, Haywood County, and the reason I keep coming back to this, because it's Haywood County. Haywood County is predominantly black. Blacks are like 2 to every 1 person, white, okay? By the election of 1888 is very pivotal. They stole the election. It's a straight out stolen election. And there was a court case about it. But by that time, when it goes to court, they control the courts too. Okay? You understand? That's what's going on. And so we move into the 20th century, segregation gets cemented. Now, I have to share with you, which some of you might probably know, that in terms of when there is the creation of an education kind of system in Tennessee, because it's not created until after the Civil War. The state of Tennessee passes a law that says blacks and whites can't be educated together, okay? So, do you understand? That's in 1868, okay? And so, when whites regain the power, and they call it redemption. When redemption is over, there are some places that defy the law and allow blacks and whites to be educated together, but then those places are persecuted. Maryville, Tennessee is one example of that. It's the only one I know in terms of a municipality. But later on, Fisk University. Now, that's one of the things that none of the black schools that are created, like Fisk, Roger Williams, and so on, they do not have a discriminatory clauses. They say that they are open to everybody and try to practice it. But then, you know, the state enforces its laws. So now, and it's those laws that are, this is again, that's the systemic racism, you know, that kind of thing, why they're there. They don't undo any of them, like Dred Scott. And then there comes Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, okay? Which is about transportation, but it covers everything. Okay? And so, for us in this room, if you grew up in the South, you have some memory of what was the result of this. And this thing lasts roughly about maybe 60 years or something like that. And for people who don't, may not realize, you know, that some young people get the impression because it's put out there like that, that the opposition to this stuff was in terms of what's called the modern civil rights movement. It had always been going on, and it's only the traction that comes with the modern civil rights movement and the publicity that it gets, you know, people like Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and all those other people in SNCC and stuff like that, Reverend C.T. Vivian, and, who are willing to put their life on the line, that kind of thing, and the publicity that comes around. But they are not a new thing in the South and in black communities. That has always been there in some shape or form. Now, let me see. Now, one of the things that we have before us, and that's where I want to end, is how do we break the back of systemic racism? And informed citizenry is one part of it, meaning that knowing what has transpired. Like we asked, and maybe some of you did that, when you were in school, what's the point of knowing history? It ain't not knowing dates, it's to know how it undergirds what is happening now. And what do I need to do, meaning as an individual person, as a person in an organization, what do I need to push my organizations to do in order to break the system that undergirds this kind of thing? We all have to know certain kinds of things, or else the end result will be, we will be participating, even in terms of perpetuating. And actually, some people do end up, they get jobs. And again, because the job is based on certain kinds of things, they have certain beliefs. And I'm talking about not just white people, I'm talking about black people too. But the beliefs are unfounded. They are unfounded. We can only know that things are unfounded when we know the history. So in terms of like the gains that we made, that's there by the 1970s and so on, some young people thought that this was the first time that we'd been there. But no, it wasn't the first time. So if that wasn't the first time, and we get pushed back, what's to say that can't happen again? And that is the crucial thing to understand systemic racism, and that it is something that can feed the behavior of well-meaning people. Well-meaning people, not racist people, well-meaning people. And it's how do we undo that? So that in terms of these kinds of inequities that have come to be, they can be resolved, okay? And one last thing before I go, is that when you are elected to office, and people that's put in office, it's important to have an agenda that at least tries to speak to undoing systemic racism. Have an agenda, not just represent people, but have an agenda that you try to do that. Now, I tell you, it makes you unpopular with people. But when you commit yourself to doing that, you can withstand being unpopular. And for young people in this audience, one of the things that you need to realize if you commit yourself to doing it is that any change is not guaranteed to come in your lifetime. You might work for 60 years and die and never see any change. But you've affected somebody who's coming after you. Maybe you never even know it, but they read about that and build on what you do. That kind of thing. All right, then, that's all I got to say. I think I'm going to use up my time.
It's supposed to work for you.
Okay, what we'd like to do, are there any questions or anything you'd like either Dr. Williams or Dr. Granberry to expand on? We'll take, it's 11:20, why don't we take about 15 minutes to engage in this conversation based on the information that you've heard, or maybe the information that you know, and she's been able to provide a larger context. Yes, ma'am, I'm on my way. Is there another line?
I can speak loud enough.
Okay.
I would like to start with the last slide, how we break the systematic racism. Based on what you said, and I think a lot of us may have been taught some of the history that you presented, which I think helped us to reflect. You have an informed citizen. Well, we were taught that, us older adults in school, but now it's not allowed for the younger generation to know some of that history. And if they're not informed, how do we get them there? And to actually teach them how the government works, because oftentimes they don't. I was looking at something last night where they was, some journalists was talking to black women, and the younger generation actually don't know how government works. So how do we get there?
I'm glad you asked that. One of the things is that you keep the struggle in terms of to expand the curriculum, the courses that are, creating the atmosphere and education, limiting what is there. So, and I'm not gonna, we know what went down about the legitimization of black history and stuff like that. That you keep that fight in terms of the school system. But the other thing is that all of you are in institutions that can be providing that kind of education that the school system does not provide. There's not anything to prevent your church from teaching that. And how do, for example, a church can decide that it's going to incorporate into its regular worship service, not just during the month of February, but all 12 months of the year, 52 weeks of the year. Something like a historical moment, okay? That everything, and that, you have somebody who presents on it, and no more than 5 minutes, not a long kind of thing. There are things that you can do in terms of like with Sunday school classes. Since, for example, the lessons are internationalized, tie them to something about history and use that as a vehicle. Again, people are in sororities and fraternities. They can do that. You're in civic club. You write a civic lesson. Now, it's youngsters, but also some grown-ups needed, that they don't know how the government operates. If you are in political organization, if your political organization doesn't have an arm that tries to bring in people who are aspiring for office or to groom them, start a program like that. Get the people in your community. If people just they can hold coffee hours with their friends, and the topic is going to be this history do you follow. There's just loads of things you can do. But like I said now, I have to tell you that in terms of, I spent 30-something years in national teaching at Tennessee State, and I participated in a lot of organizations. I wasn't necessarily the most popular person in the organization because I was commissioned in life to do what I'm doing. You understand what I'm saying? I remember one time in the 1970s, a woman who was in an organization said, "Oh my God, here's Dr. Cranberry with so-and-so, so-and-so." Meaning, I always knew what my agenda was. This was the role I was to play. And you can play it in every organization you're in, because that's what I do. I said, why don't we do so-and-so, so-and-so? I don't get, sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not successful, that kind of thing. Since I've been in Maryland, with COVID, I was trying to get it back in my group, but COVID came along, and then I was so old when COVID and it kept, I don't, I haven't come up with my version now. But my point is, the best thing you can do, and you're creative, just remember, and you're not trying to cover the waterfront, you just may pick a particular, one little bit, but certainly in terms of the children, I think there are ways that with the school system, in terms of its narrow vision of what kind of history, that the true version of American history can you talk to us?
If I can say something to respond to your question like that, I'll be brief. At TSU, I teach classes that explore public memory, but also public amnesia. And what we strive to do is to, redefine what we mean by classroom, where learning takes place. Because where we're doing it now, in the public schools and even in some universities, they are under assault, right? It's become fashionable to make us nervous about teaching this history. So we should find places that are immune or insulated from the State House. So this might be a church, or I gave what I thought was a beautiful lecture yesterday. And all my lectures are pretty good, but this one was at the corner of 4th, if you know Nashville, the corner of 4th and MLK, where the slave market was located. That whole strip's numbered slave brokers. So I talked about Nashville being the second largest slave port in the volunteer state. Right there at that corner where people were sold. I recited a few of the names that I knew that were sold at that space. And that was a lesson that I cannot replicate in the classroom. But also look at other things like historical markers and things of that nature. Historical markers that highlight our history, that highlight, and this is a big thing for me, highlight the history of Black women in these spaces. They'll reach way more people than I can over the course of a week or even a semester. Okay.
Yeah, I've got a little different approach to breaking the back of systemic racism. And at first, I appreciate Dr. Granberry's excellent review of our history. Now, some of you might be familiar with J.R. Ross, who was the CEO of West Tennessee Healthcare, one of the greatest organizations, medical organizations in West Tennessee. He was my wife's nursing student. They taught history. Now, he came to be the head of the largest medical institution in West Tennessee. Now, by hard work and diligent work, he's deceased now, unfortunately. But another example is a friend of mine for many years, a graduate of Lane University, and grew up on a sharecropper's farm in Haywood County. He rose to some of the top levels of management in the Procter & Gamble. Very successful. And but he rose through all this by hard work. And of course he had his grandparents who took him to church every Sunday and taught him the ethics of good behavior. And then there's another Haywood County person that's of significance. Grew up on a sharecropper's farm, and one of 8 children in the family. He's now the CEO of Lowe's, one of the greatest organizations in the United States. And he rose up by hard work and having a father in the family that gave him the real good instruction. So hard work and disciplined behavior, I think, is one of the real keys to breaking the back of racism. At least people that I know are exceptional.
Yes, I would agree with you, hard work. For 300 and some 400 years, the hardest working folks in the United States, African American. You know, James Brown showed the hard working man in show business. The hard to work with people. So in terms of names is really bothering me, but the young man who is now the head of Rose, that in terms of one of the questions we have to ask relative to systemic racism is why his father could not have been in that position at that time. His father worked hard. His father's father worked hard. His father's father worked hard. His father's father worked hard and hard. That whole kind of thing, that even in terms of you work hard, that there is something that gets in the way of your work paying on for you. That it's that thing that we have to get rid of. That people, are not working hard and working hard and working hard. One of the things I used to say in the 1960s when James Brown said, and James Brown actually sort of believed, and I'm not saying he wasn't exceptional, but I know, because I'm trained in statistics, okay? I know that the number of people who get ahead for working hard in terms of African Americans in the United States at any period of time is not even the number that statistically you would expect by chance. I'm making this up. That is really true. Now, I'm not saying that people should not work hard again. But what I'm saying is that for everyone that succeeds, there are a multitude who work just as hard, who are as talented, but it does not reach anything, who are disciplined, and so on and so on. Because there are these barriers. For example, that suspicion, especially when you get into certain places, that you're there, taking a seat that should be my seat. So, for example, we went through that with the Buckley case. Now, but we know schools like Yale and Harvard and the University of Chicago, all of them have what they call legacy spots. But there never are attacks on those spots. This is when they had affirmative action, and there was suspicion. This was from the 1970s. When I was in graduate school in the 1960s, there was in higher education the notion that to teach African American history was illegitimate because it was not worth. That's essentially what it was. It was not worth teaching. Then that was reason you may remember the struggles at Cornell and different universities to establish that kind of thing, that it was illegitimate, that these people had not done anything that one should be studying. Did you understand? That it's all of that kind of stuff. I think that we have to, but we have to be aware of it. We have to know that it's out there, and think. Now, I don't have an answer how you're going to do all of it, but what is it that we can do about it? We don't just have to lament that Governor Lee signed so and so that makes this happen. Relative to education in Tennessee. What is our agenda that we're going to counter this? Maybe some just quiet kinds of things that you start in your community, but it can be done.
For a long time, the NAACP has known that one thing that gets in the way of a real discussion on issues of racism is fear, ignorance, and greed. How do we change that narrative in terms of getting information that's relevant to the masses of the people? Just a few days ago, I think someone bought about 4 or 5 radio stations in Jackson, Madison County alone. And each one of those spew out that rhetoric. How are we to accomplish getting information where it needs to be, and how can we build confidence in this community and others across rural West Tennessee in addressing this problem?
That really is a dilemma in terms of those three things that this notion of fear, I think it's in terms of, education, and more people know things, they come to realize that they don't have to fear certain things. But I think even more so is to get in the fabric of community life that people realize that rules and laws are made by people, and that, and especially for young people, and that if anybody's gonna be making rules, and that they're gonna be making rules. Do you understand? I once worked with some people in Nashville, and these were young people, like teenagers and so on like that. They were having problems in school, and I was running a workshop in relation to them, and I asked whether any of them planned to aspire to be a director of school. No. Well, in terms of what their problem that they were encountering, if they had planned I didn't expect that, but understood that the way to undo some certain kinds of thing is that you get that power position, the director of schools, and that there are certain things that are even running for the school board, that kind of thing. Understand that you can be the roommate, that you can be the roommate. I had Marvin Ellison. He's making the rules for loans. And when we elect Kamala Harris, she'll be making the rules for the United States. But you have to understand if you're that's what I was talking about, if you're in a political organization, have as a unit that is trying to identify people who want to run for office and groom them. So that's the thing about greed. They greed, so at least try to minimize, the greed kind of thing. Politicians and preachers, that there's equal opportunity profession, and they attract people who want to appear to be standing for something, but all they want is to rake in money for themselves. That's the point about greed. It's how do you sort of keep them out and get some of the good people. Now, I have spent a lifetime going around trying to get people to run for political office, and what I discovered was that the good people, it's hard to get them to want to run. And the people who got a order about that greed operating, they readily, want to run. So, but I think, just those kinds of things. You NAACP chapter, identifying people who, if you're in a sorority or fraternity, identify the women that, maybe, some of them may not even have the ambition, but if you see somebody who has organizational skills and take charge, we all see those people, that's when you come into a room and it's not that duty to call the room to order, but they call the room to order. When you sit around the table, they take charge of what the table's supposed to do. When you see people do that, ask them if they are sort of interested, even if they say they're not interested. Keep inviting them, and suggest that they run for so-and-so, so-and-so, which means you have to know, how these offices, operate and stuff like that. There are lots of things. I think only limited by your imagination that you can do.
And I'd like to address your question about communication. The first thing that's critical is just figuring out who you want to talk to, right? If you're looking for younger folks, it's probably a good idea to speak to young folks to find out how much they communicate with each other. I know this firsthand from some of the work that I do at TSU. I'm always communicating with my students, and so I was working on this project, and one young lady said, she said, Dr. Williams, why don't you get on Facebook? All the old folks hang out on Facebook. And I was like, well, what you trying to say? But I started a Facebook page for my work, and then people started reaching out to me. As far as having conversations about race and being courageous. I'm fortunate to be in Nashville where we still have some folks that participated in the Freedom Rides, right? Some folks that participated in the sit-ins, people that confronted race face on, people who had to be courageous to get involved. Communications with those folks to find out what it took for them to get from point A to point B to where we memorialize them as being brave. But also honest conversations in terms of finding out where they succeeded and finding out where they struggled. I think this is critical if we're going to have that talk. And bearing in mind too, the folks that participated in the civil rights movement, they were young people, right? They're 18, 19 years old. And when we look at them, and wow, I might be talking about some of y'all, so don't take no offense here. There's a certain level of audacity that we have when we're 18, 19 years old. A certain level of looking at life and saying, hey, we going to make things better or we going to die trying. So those are my thoughts. Just reaching out, after you determine who you want to talk to, reach out and find out the best way to communicate with them. And you know, it might be by me, but it might be in the form of some technology that we have out that I don't know about.
Okay, we are going to take one more question for this segment. Please keep your answers brief. And while we get our next presenter up on Zoom, I would suggest that you take a break, maybe visit the powder room, and we'll reconvene. So you had one.
I did. So we talked about government and we talked about education, but I wonder, what do you say to folks that say that Christianity is the white man's religion? What do you say to folks that say that Christianity even played a part in keeping African Americans enslaved here in America?
And it's funny because we were just talking about this in the class this week. My response is this: what do Gabriel Prosser and Denmark Vesey and Nat Turner all have in common? All these dudes were preachers. They were leaders in our community. So whereas, you know, when enslavers introduced these religions to us, you know, they emphasized, right, a lot of servants be obedient to your masters in all things. A lot of just being passive, just waiting on the Lord. And I'm not saying you shouldn't wait on the Lord, you should, right? But be that as may, we have some individuals in this space that have led to a lot of the things that we enjoy today, whether some as radical as saying that we should overthrow our masters, or whether it's Dr. King saying, I have a dream, which is a very radical speech if you care to read all of it. Or all those ministers, those would-be ministers that enrolled at American Baptist College during the 60s. They are coming from that Christian tradition. And that would be my response to that. It's been our tradition to take something that was meant for ill for us and to turn it into something we can use, a good metaphor. It might sound kind of weird, but I'm gonna put it out there. some of us eat chitlins, right? We enjoy chitlins and pig feet and malls. But that wasn't part of the hog that people embrace, people will love. He took that and made something with that. Made something that we could use. The same sort of thing when it comes to Christianity. The Christianity that enslavers had in mind for us wasn't, we heard that, but we really didn't hear it. We listened to that first interview that God had with Moses when he says, I've heard the cry of my people that are in Egypt. He dispatches them to liberate them. That's my response to your question. I do want to wrap to you a little bit more about religion, but I don't think my time.
Yeah, I like to add, I just have to add this, that yes, we ought to be clearly teaching what the enslavers meant by that Christianity, but we need to be teaching also the notion that the Africans themselves, they did take the thing, but that their being, their humanity was not destroyed. You can do all kinds of horrible things to people, but you can't take their humanity away from them. But that's the notion that exists in this world and we don't focus on what they built, meaning the African people. They're enslaved. That religion is very different from white Christianity. But aside from black people who know that, nobody else seems to know that. Do you follow that? That is something. So one of the things that I was struck by as a child, all the people that I grew up with, they were sharecroppers, but in the church, they knew what Moses stood for. Do you understand? I was always struck by that because Moses spoke to their historical condition. Moses, and when black folks call him Jesus, Lord have mercy, that Jesus is a different Jesus. But we are not taught that what was that Jesus that they created, because the idea in the United States is that while it wasn't, it was horror. Now, I'm not saying that system was not horrible, but it wasn't their fault. They were in that horrible system, and they were somehow washed out their humanity. And so the things that they created don't get acknowledged. That's what I say. But I strongly think people ought to be taught what was meant by it. It's just like, with Christianity, with education. I went through an education system that was deliberately designed to make black folks inferior. And then we ought to teach that and point out how the example of that. But my parents and my community attempted to overstep that. If they understood that the curriculum, the money, all was meant to happen about